I mean, they are making advances in Zaporizhzhia Oblast, but at the actual city of Zaporizhzhia, no, that's a fantasy. It's a very large city. It straddles the river Dnipro. It would be very, very difficult for Russia to take. Um, it would require, huge numbers of troops, which they really don't have. And if Ukraine was determined to defend, which they obviously would be, it would take huge amounts of casualties to take. And then, what would they gain if they take Zaporizhzhia? They'd almost certainly reduce it to ruins in the process. And again, it's just another ruined city, town that Russia has taken, which will never have any economic potential in Putin's lifetime. So, could they focus all their efforts in advancing towards Zaporizhzhia? They could, but at the moment, the main effort is in Donetsk again. So, I think it's an idle threat at the moment, but it indicates the Russian intent really, and it indicates the view that they're not just going to be satisfied with Donetsk, regardless of what they say. They want at least Kherson and Zaporizhzhia Oblast in their entirety, and they probably want more than that as well. They want Ukraine in its entirety, at least as a puppet state, similar to Belarus. They don't want Ukraine to be an independent entity, deciding its own foreign policy, deciding its own internal policy. They want it to be completely under the control of the Kremlin.
And another sign of that, which came alongside those orders to seize Zaporizhzhia city, was these orders to advance into northern Ukraine. Now, we know that had already really been going on, but there's been some... Putin has now specifically said that he wants Russian troops to take Sumy and Kharkiv regions. That's presumably the same level of almost pipe dream as trying to seize Zaporizhzhia in 2026.
I mean, it's even more fantastical, to be honest. Kharkiv, it's a massive city. Russia couldn't take that in years. I mean, literally. It's just not going to happen. Sumy as well. They did try and push towards Sumy, and they got, a few 10, 15 kilometers from the border, and then the Ukrainians managed to push them back. Similar in Kharkiv Oblast in 2024. They pushed into Vovchansk and to the left of Vovchansk on the other side of the river towards the north west of Kharkiv. And again, they got 10, 15, 20 kilometers from the border, but then the Ukrainians pushed them back. So what did they manage to achieve in Kharkiv? Well, they reduced a Ukrainian town, Vovchansk, to ruins again. They sacrificed, tens of thousands of Russian soldiers' lives. They did divert the Ukrainian attention, but at the same time, they diverted Russian resources, which they could have used to further their advances in Donetsk and other more probably important parts of the front. So arguably, it was a strategic mistake to open that front. They haven't really gained anything from it. And they could attempt to push further in that direction, but again, it would mean diverting forces from their main efforts, which are generally in the Donetsk Oblast.
And on the other side of the Russia-Ukraine border, Ukrainian drones have been hitting Moscow reportedly since the new year, almost daily, and today hitting more energy infrastructure within Russia. Where might Ukraine take its strikes on Russian energy infrastructure in 2026?
Yeah, they have, and they've caused blackouts in Moscow, which is kind of amazing, really, considering what the Russian views of themselves as being this massive military power, which could never, be subjected to these kind of strikes. And at the start of the war, Ukraine had no drone program. The Russians obviously purchased these long-range drones from the Iranians and started building them themselves. But the Ukrainians didn't even do that. They just started from scratch and built this drone program from nothing to, this program which launches hundreds of drones per night and takes out extremely expensive targets in Russia regularly. So I think you'll see more of the same. I think you'll see more strikes on oil facilities, refineries. I think you'll see more strikes on high-value Russian military targets. You started to see the last Q4 of last year, significant Ukrainian strikes on Russian military targets in Crimea. I mean, that had been going on for a long time, but they'd generally been focusing on radars and air defense targets. But what you saw in the last few months was they were repeatedly targeting aircraft. They were targeting fighter jets, they were targeting transport aircraft, helicopters, because they'd really degraded the Russian air defense network to the point where they could fly around Crimea with almost impunity. So I think you'll see more of this. You'll see more kind of systematic degradation of Russian air defenses. You'll see more strikes on oil refineries, infrastructure. You might see more strikes against symbolic targets around Moscow. To get through to the Russian people that this is not a war that they can kind of ignore, that this is not a war that's just happening in a faraway country. This is a war that Ukraine is bringing to their doorstep. It's a war that Russia started, but in the famous quote from Sir Arthur Bomber Harris would have said in relation to World War II, the Germans entered this war under the rather childish delusion that they were going to bomb everyone else and nobody was going to bomb them. I think that could be applied to this war. The Russians are very, very happy when they bomb Kyiv and Ukrainian targets, but they didn't think it was going to be going in the other direction. And Ukrainians are a nation of engineers. Remember, this is the country that built the largest aircraft in the world, which is unfortunately destroyed in the Russian invasion of Ukraine. But, they're a country of incredibly talented, resourceful people. And, it was never just going to go one way. And I think you're seeing that. And you're seeing the collapse of Russian oil infrastructure. You're seeing the Russian economy suffering, severe pressure at the moment. And I think continued Ukrainian drone strikes will only add to that pressure. I don't think it's going to collapse the Russian economy, but I think it's going to put it under severe strain.
And it's a new year, new team for Volodymyr Zelensky. How should we read the appointment of Kirill Budanov, his former sort of head of the Secret Service, as his new chief of staff?
Yeah, so Budanov was head of GUR, which is Ukrainian military intelligence. It's an interesting appointment. He is someone that is relatively well trusted in Ukraine. He's someone that has had a pretty glittering career at GUR. And I think this is someone that Zelensky, he knew that he needed to appoint someone who was, had credibility, who was trusted by the Ukrainian people. And also someone that wasn't viewed as just another person from within his circle. And Budanov is a lot of things, but he's not a Zelensky yes man. So it's an interesting appointment. Obviously, the question is, he was doing a good job at GUR. I think it's especially strange considering the news today that the head of the SBU has also been replaced, demoted. Vasily Malyuk, who was behind the extraordinary Operation Spiderweb, which saw Russian strategic bombers targeted by hidden FPV drones. So yeah, it's a slightly strange decision to demote him whilst losing the head of Ukrainian military intelligence at the same time. So yeah, a lot of people in Ukraine are slightly puzzled by that specifically.
And he's also, interestingly, made the addition of Canadian lawmaker Chrystia Freeland as his economic development advisor. She's part Ukrainian, but it was just an interesting appointment to me because it kind of reminds us of the relatively close links between Canada and Ukraine, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. Obviously, Canada has a very large Ukrainian diaspora, and they've raised a lot of money for Ukraine. Canada has supplied a lot of armed vehicles specifically to Ukraine, and they've been, very vocal in supporting the Ukrainian military and the Ukrainian state generally. So yeah, it's an interesting appointment. Slightly left field again. I don't think anyone saw it coming. To be honest, not many people knew about her. She's not a big figure. She's not someone that personally had crossed my gaze before, but interested to see what she can bring to this role.
And coming back to the front line in Ukraine, we'd heard before Christmas of some pretty significant tactical successes at Kupiansk for the Ukrainians, and kind of counteracting claims from Kiev and Moscow about who had the advantage there. Do you know what the situation is there now?
Yeah, absolutely. The situation is that Ukraine controls the vast majority of that city. There are a few hundred Russian soldiers still in the center. They are encircled. Ukraine is clearing the city at this point. These soldiers are trapped, and if they don't surrender, they'll be killed essentially. Um, it's interesting. I think you saw a demonstration of how Putin is told a systematic kind of campaign of lies from the Russian military, because he was told that Russia captured Kupiansk, which is why he came out and made this big statement saying that Russia had captured Kupiansk, when in fact the opposite was true, that Ukraine was in the process of staging an effective counteroffensive led by Azov Corps of the National Guard and others. And yeah, they pushed the Russians back. They surrounded the remains of the Russian military that's still in the city. Russia is now trying to push some forces back into the city. They're using their standard tactic of using very small numbers of infantry, moving from cover to cover, attempting to evade detection. But at this point, it doesn't seem to be working. They've also tried to infiltrate via a pipeline again. They've done this multiple times. They stuff their guys into these old abandoned oil and gas pipelines and try and circumvent Ukrainian defenses that way. It has worked a couple of times, but the Ukrainians are generally wise to that strategy by now, and they've been keeping a close eye on all these potential points of ingress. So yeah, it's in Kupiansk. It's very much in Ukrainians' favor, and the Russians. It was very embarrassing for them because they claimed that they captured it, and then Zelensky obviously turned up, did his famous video selfie outside of the city, to the point where the Russians sent an FPV drone to strike the sign so that they could try and claim that no, Zelensky couldn't have been there because the sign looks slightly different. Well, it did look different. That's because they used a drone to blow it up. But that kind of shows that the depth of the Russian kind of cope and the Russian kind of embarrassment that Zelensky was able to do this. Because again, like I've said this multiple times, but Zelensky has a significant amount of personal bravery. He is a brave man, something which Putin absolutely is not.
You've been watching Frontline for Times Radio with me, Louis Sykes. For more on the war in Ukraine, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel, or you can also sign up for a membership where you'll get exclusive content and access to videos earlier than you would otherwise. And remember, for the latest news and analysis, you can read The Times at thetimes.com, or you can listen to Times Radio. And if you want to hear more from Frontline, you can also hear us in podcast form. Just look for Times Radio's Frontline wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks very much. Goodbye.